Welcome back. Glad to have you with me today. We're going to deep dive into authentication. We are on a test server right now. We had set up some paths with this a few days back. It's had some time to collect some data for us. You can see in the graphs it's populated some information for us now. One of the things that we can see though is we have sentry warnings and access warnings. We also have a bill sync failure, but that is outside the scope of what we're going to discuss today. So we are going to talk about authentication and how you can set it up, how specific the credentials are, determine what order they're tried in. And so the closer you get to the resource, those credentials will be used first to try to gain access if you've configured the path to require authentication. So let's start with that step first. How do you indicate a path is supposed to have authentication? And that is done a couple of different ways. If you look at this little padlock, it is unlocked. That means authentication is not required. But if I click it, you'll see that it locks. And now that indicates to the program, hey, you're going to need some credentials to get into this path. And so now we can talk about where do I set these credentials up. Well, the first spot would be on the path itself. And so if this would be the most specific because we're setting it directly on the path. And if I come in here, you'll see I've already checked authentication on this. So we've got authentication checked. We have not set any credentials at all. If I go here and here, you can see both. We'll come back to this and we'll set up authentication on this folder directly later, but we're not right now. You may have seen when I click through here, there's one that's also labeled folder authentication access denied check. And this will allow you to enter some credentials here that should not have access to this folder. So maybe it's a regular user account on your network. You copy and clone that, and you don't want regular users to be able to access your folder. You could put that account in here, and if it can access the folder for some reason, it will alert you in the UI that it got access via the access warning that I showed you on the dashboard. So if we come back, now in this case, this access warning is not that because we haven't configured it, but if we come in, we're gonna open up a tab and we'll take a look at it. And if I hover over authentication, you'll see the path cannot be accessed. Please confirm the path is correct. Authentication is configured. Well, we don't have authentication configured yet, which you saw. So let's start at the least specific credentials to apply to this path, and then we'll do some testing. And so the least specific would be your global organizational settings, and I'm going to open this up here. All right, so if we come to folder authentication, I had set up backup user is the user account that should be able to access this thing, and so it's there. And as we saw earlier on the path, it's not there. And as far as credentials go, if you read up at the top here, we try to put this everywhere there are credentials so you don't forget. But you can see on the left-hand side of this chart, the least specific, here where I'm highlighting with my mouse, is the organization, and it gets more specific as we move to the right. So the next closest would be the warehouse server. Then after that, the client itself would be a little more specific, and then all the way down to the path. And so you can layer your authentication attempts with whatever makes sense for the architecture of your network. And so we've got our credentials entered here. Let's go ahead and run a test. I'm just going to manually run our collector. Let me make this a little bigger for us, and we should be able to see. It's going to go through a lot of this. Will be gobbledygook to you, but we should see in here that it's going to come to the path, and it's going to need credentials, and we should see that it does use the organization credentials and authenticate successfully. Now up at the top, you'll see there's a deny access check section up there. Only paths that have been configured to require authentication will go through that check. And to go through the check, it needs a set of credentials set up for deny access, which we haven't done yet. So that section we can just disregard for now. Okay, so as we got down to the bottom here, you'll see that we did connect to the folder after trying the key for organization. I'll just try to highlight this for you so it stands out a little better. So let's see, this is really what we're looking for. And it shows that we were authenticating to the folder, and we tried the key set at the organizational level, which we just did, and that key was successful. And there is nothing in that directory. It is just an empty directory right now. We don't have anything in there, so that is correct, that it indicates it is an empty directory. So let's go to the next level. Let's go ahead and we'll delete our backup user from here, so we no longer have those credentials saved, and we should be able to verify this is correct. You can see here there was an exception. It was the username or password was incorrect. Well, we didn't have one, so this is correct. This check should have failed. We'll clear this one out, and let's set it at the warehouse level. So at the warehouse level, what we're doing is any paths that belong on this particular warehouse server, which is in this case HV host 1, any paths that appear here, it will try a set of credentials to get into any path on it that's marked as requiring authentication. So we'll come down here to the bottom, go to folder authentication, we'll put in our user account. We'll make a save on this. We'll come back, and now that we have warehouse credentials, we should see that it successfully authenticates this time, and that it used the warehouse credentials to do it. So as it tries credentials, it's noted here. It's also put into the log. You probably will never come in and run the collector directly. You don't really have a reason to. There is a Windows service that runs that will fire this off as needed to keep your data up to date in the cloud. But for the sake of this video and to demonstrate this, I am manually running this. Again, not something you would normally have to do. Okay, so we can see, again, let's see what we've got here. Authentication is required. That is correct. It says warehouse creds are stored in the keyring, which is correct. We were using the warehouse, so it's trying those credentials, and it accessed the folder. It tried the key for the warehouse. It connected successfully, and we can see that it populated an empty directory again. So that is our warehouse credentials. The client, the way the credentials will work is any server that is tied to that client, it will try these credentials. It will try to use them if they're available, and if they work, they'll let it in. So, all right, so I'm going to delete these credentials here. Folder authentication, they will disappear, and we'll move on to the next step here. All right, so our credentials are gone. We don't have anything in for that either. So we said, let's go to the client. Well, the client we want to be talking about, we only have one client right now, is VenomWorks, is what everything is listed under. So let's go to our client. We'll edit our client. You can see we have our credentials. Our section is here. We don't have anything currently set, but we're going to set them now. So all right, we're going to save these credentials. We'll come back to our program. We'll run it. Okay, so we come down to the same area here. We're going to look. It does say authentication is required. It's retrieving credentials. It found client creds in the keyring. And as we continue down, it says it's authenticating. It is trying the key for the client. So we can see now only the client key is tried, and let's go one more time. We're going to go to the path, and then we'll show you how the hierarchy works. Again, deep dive. You don't necessarily need to know all the mechanics of this, but for a full understanding, it doesn't hurt, right? So let's come back to our paths. This path is the one we want to put credentials on that we currently don't have credentials in. So let's put in our backup user. We will save these credentials, and we'll run this again. So let's run it. We should see at the end that it finds credentials for the path, and it applies the credentials found at the path, and we should get access. Okay, so success. We can look at the bottom. It again says it's retrieving the credentials. It knows it needs authentication. It says it's trying the key for the path this time, and it connected successfully. So it's working as expected. Now what we'll do is I'm going to add credentials into these other fields. So the client level, the warehouse level, all of them, and we'll run it and we'll see what looks different, if anything, during the processing. So we've saved that. We have a warehouse server we want to do it on as well. We'll just save these credentials here. And we had our global level that we need to add them back into. Okay, and just for demonstration purposes, I tell you what we'll do. We'll go back to our path, and that is the most specific one. And at the path, we're going to flub up our account. I'm just going to append an X on the end, so these credentials are no longer valid. The program, of course, doesn't know that, but it should know those are the most specific credentials, and to try those first. So now with all 4 credentials set and a wrong credential set on the path, which should be tried first, let's see what we get. Fantastic. We can see at the end that we've got some, let's see, we've got, it says retrieving credentials. It's got path creds, has client creds are stored, warehouse creds, org creds, so that's all right. We did all those, and it's checking. It's an API, so it knows it's not going to iterate everything that's exactly in the folder. It doesn't need it. It's using the API to push the usage information, but we do this check, and so it authenticates to the folder. It tried the key path, and it could not connect. And remember, we purposely changed our key, our credentials to make them bad. So let's bring this up. The correct username would be backup user, not backup user X. So this failed, and then the next most specific credentials are the client, which you can see, well, it failed at path, so it moves to the client credentials. It says it's trying the key, and it was able to successfully connect. So let's do this. Let's have a little more fun, since this is a deep dive after all. Let's go to our client, wherever we have them at, and let's flub up those credentials. We'll just do the same thing, but we know that worked pretty well. Put an X on the end. We'll just save that, and let's clear this out and run it again. Maximize that for maximum viewing pleasure. So what we should see is it will try the path credentials. They'll fail again. It will then move on to the client credentials, which this time are no good because we just modified them so they wouldn't work. And when the client credentials fail, the next closest or the next most specific credentials that are stored in the system are at the warehouse level. We should see the program retrieve those keys and use those keys at the warehouse level, or the credentials at the warehouse level, and gain access to that folder, which is, again, an empty folder, but for this exercise, we're just using it to display whether it can gain access or not. And see at the bottom, it looks pretty right to me, so we can see it's a little too far up. It says it's authenticating, it's trying the path, and it couldn't. It has an error. So if I show this whole section here belongs together. Then it tried the client key, and it could not connect to the path. So now it is trying the warehouse key, and it did connect, and it populated, well, would have populated what's in that folder. All right, deep dive. Last one on this. Let's go ahead and fudge up these credentials at the warehouse level. We'll do the same thing. We'll make that backup X. We'll save those changes. And so now the only credentials that are still good are the ones at the organizational level, but these are the least specific credentials there are. So, these would be the last ones that it will check. And so we'll just run this again. It will try them all in order. From path, it'll move on to the client, and from the client, it'll move on to the warehouse. And from the warehouse, if the credentials stored there won't work, it will try credentials if they are stored at the organizational level. It'll try to get in with those as well. So this system gives you a lot of flexibility in how you determine you're going to authenticate to your equipment. It could really depend on architecture. You may have different credentials for every single path that you have. You may have a set of credentials that are stored on a specific warehouse so that one warehouse server can access all the different backup folders. In that case, I would put the credentials at a higher level. In the first case, you can go in path by path if you've got unique credentials for each one and put it in there if you need to. So we're almost done here. It's trying the keys. I see down at the bottom it is trying the key for the path. We know that's going to fail because we purposely changed the username on that one, so it will fail. So it finished running. We can see that it retrieved the credentials. It has all 4, 3 of which we had set to be wrong, and so as we see, it tries to authenticate. It can't do that through each key, and it continues to try the keys until we get to the organizational one, and it was able to access the folder, and it would have populated the contents of this folder if it were not empty.